So I noticed today that in the children's work, the text was the Elijah on Mount Carmel. That's what they were doing. And I thought that I would talk about that this morning, talk about some parts from that, because I feel like it's a story that we know really well. But perhaps there's something in it for us today. Okay. I'm going to tell you what my points are. Because the thing is, we started this service with a word saying, the Lord saying, "What are you expecting?" Didn't we? And so it made me think, probably, when the Lord says that, "What are you expecting?" He's really saying, you're kind of expecting the wrong thing. You're limiting me. You're limiting me in some way. And then we have the idea that God is greater than any problem or difficulty that there is. Greater than death. Greater than illness. Greater than sin. Greater than Satan. Greater than any world power. Greater than Russia, China, North Korea added together. He is so much infinitely greater. And then it's almost like he's not pleading with us, but just encouraging us and calling out to us and trying to draw us in. Say, come into the embrace of the one who is greater. What battle have I ever lost? What situation have I ever looked silly in? What future problem have I not overcome? What have I not done perfectly, fully, awesomely, correctly? What are you expecting today? And I do think in this story there's real resonates with this. Just, Lord, help me. Lord, help me to just go to those places so that we can receive from God and be moved on. Because that's the idea of all of this, isn't it? So perhaps, first of all, I'll say this about this. Do I have to go over the story? That's just very briefly then. Elijah has said to Ahab, the king of Samaria, Ahab and Jezebel, wicked leaders of Samaria. God has spoken through Elijah to say there'll be a drought. And it's to do with the fact that God is trying to lead his people back to a place of submission to his will. That is what it's all about. And what happens is it appears that the threat, the existential threat upon our lives sometimes has to become so great that in the end we have to decide what it is we're going to do. We have to decide whom we are going to follow. But it almost like when we don't have to decide right now, we can dwell in between two positions. And that's kind of how this story goes. It's kind of point when we get to that now you have to decide point. And so that's the background of it. The drought in Samaria is so severe that it's all that people can think about. It's that bad. All the stores are gone. Now they're thinking we're going to have to kill the animals because there's nothing to feed them with and they're just going to die, that we'd be better off killing them, saving the food and eating them. And, when you get to that point, you're cutting off your future for the sake of a few more days. That's how bad it was. And, we look at the world around us and we can think it's very bad. Now, that could fill us with the doom-laden thought of no future. But if, however, we looked at the Lord who says, I have never lost a battle, right? We could think to ourselves, he is one who sometimes brings the world to a place like that for his good purposes. The day of reckoning comes, and on the day of reckoning, an opportunity is given to people to respond to him. And I guess that's the background of this. I'm going to talk about Obadiah. This is probably important. This may be important for us today. Probably is important. Right, so in the story, I'm going to just read a little bit about Obadiah. It's 1 Kings 18. Elijah's been hidden for years. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." So God is telling Elijah, the droughts will finish. Go and tell Ahab. So Elijah went. Elijah was somebody in the scriptures who just did what God said. You know, it's interesting, the first passage was about Zechariah, who goes into the temple, and the angel speaks to him and said, "The Lord has heard your prayers." And actually, Zechariah had forgotten the prayer he'd prayed. And the idea of him having a son was completely impossible. But then we remember Genesis, don't we? There is nothing impossible for God. So the angel spoke that over his life. And he actually said that you will have a son, and he will have the same spirit as Elijah, who we're looking at today. And it's the spirit that does bring people back. See, some people have that on them, but not everybody has that same spirit on them. So Elijah goes, because he had the spirit of Elijah. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Right. So Obadiah is a devout believer in the Lord, but he is in charge of the palace of Ahab and Jezebel, which is a deeply pagan, sinful place. So interesting to just point out that if in this year you are working in a place which is not for the Lord, you're working in the place that is actually saying you may not speak to others about Christ. See how, in God's way of establishing his kingdom, he uses devout believers to, in a subversive manner, bring about his good purposes. So that maybe is like a first point. The ministries that the Lord gives us are diverse. We shouldn't look to have the ministry of another. We have a ministry, but we should operate in that ministry. And we should do that in 2024. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and he had supplied them with food and water. So it's like just a little thing, isn't it? What are we looking at? Are we looking at the prophets being killed by Jezebel? Or are we looking at the way the Lord works a wonderful salvation so that actually there will be people to minister to God's people in the future? There's 2 ways of looking at it. Elijah felt the same way later, after the fire had fallen, and after he was shocked to find it, they still wanted to kill him. He goes out and he says, "I am the only one left, Lord. I'm the only one left who's going to serve you." And of course, the Lord eventually says to him in that still small voice, "No, you aren't. And I am the one who raises kings and sets them down. I'm the one who holds history in his hand." Said it so tenderly. Even though Elijah was looking for the earth, wind and fire, whatever it is, the earthquake, and the fire to fall and all the rest, he spoke in that way. And do we need to hear that ourselves today? So Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals." So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in the other. And this is my next point. Where are we looking for sustenance? Right. Where are we looking for a refreshing infilling from God? See, there is a tendency that when we're feeling dry to go back to the place where we got water before, isn't there? It's inevitable, isn't it? Like if you were thirsty and you were in your house, you maybe go to the kitchen sink and turn on the tap and water would come out and you drink from it. But it's an interesting thing, I think, that we tend to still go back to places where we got water even though it's dried up. Because that is in essence what Ahab is saying here. I mean, there hasn't been any rain for 3 years. He's saying, let's go and check again in the places where it's already dry. Let's check again there to see if there's anything there. And I think this is a natural thing to do. I was imagining examples from my own life, silly ones, like I got some eye drops from the doctor, and I was really pleased because these were eye drops with a really good applicator. from the chemist. Normally I get this applicator where the eye drops all just squirt out. I just think the NHS buy the cheap stuff, right? Well, thank you. Good rescue. And it was a really good applicator, right? And I was really pleased, and I thought when the other one runs out, I'll be glad to use that, but I couldn't find it. I thought, how have I lost these eye drops? And there's a place where I keep like medication and stuff, and all the very many cosmetics that I use to keep myself looking so young, right? And I keep it in the same place. And then what happened was, it wasn't there, right? It wasn't there. I searched it, I pulled everything out. I thought, it isn't there, how very odd. And for like 6 weeks I was looking for it. By the way, it was down the side of my bed, right? But I kept going back to the same place again and again. Like, it's a funny, do you understand the habit that we have? Like, to just go back. When I was in Malawi, visiting the missionaries in Malawi, Alan and Sandra, I went a few times. And on one occasion, we're driving through an area and there were some people there. And Alan said, people often congregate here because some years ago, a United Nations truck came there and dropped off a load of food. Right? And when they're very hungry, people just come back there. He said it was a one-off event. Nobody's announced that any new truck is coming. But when the people are very hungry, you often see them come there. They just come in the hope that maybe the truck will come and give out all of this food again. Do you understand what I mean? Do you hear what I'm saying this morning? Right? If we go back to the place that is now dry, looking for water, right, it isn't necessarily going to work out for us. See, I think what Ahab is doing is he's trying to create a new strategy to overcome a problem, but he isn't dealing with the actual problem itself. Right? The problem is that God has decreed there will be no more rain. So the only way to resolve that problem is to go to where? To God. Not to go to the place where God has before given a refreshing drink of water, but to go back to God, who is the one who is able. Apparently Einstein or somebody like that said that doing the same thing over and over again and is expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. Right? But actually, if we look at this little theory, when I go to God, he supplies my every need. Right? That would keep on working, people. And that is, I think, an important message for us today, because it's like the prophetic word was sort of saying, here I am. This is what I'm really like. What do you think I'm like? And you have worries, and you have fears, and you have anxieties. Just come to me. And here in this story, they are getting to the point where they are really concerned about having any future at all. And you know, the Lord knows the day of reckoning has come. That's why he sends Elijah. But they're still looking, right? I'm just saying, are we doing that in any way in our life at all? Are we trying to connect to some old blessing or old thing that used to work but isn't anymore because we don't want to deal with the fact that it is God that we need to go to? Because when God speaks to us, maybe he's saying something we don't want to hear. And you know, that is a thing that is also in this text. This text is saying that the demands of God are disturbing. They ruffle us up. They discombobulate us. Because, you know, on Mount Carmel, before the fire falls, and when Elijah is speaking to the people, and he's saying, who are you going to follow? Are you going to follow Baal, or are you going to follow God? He's saying that somebody who believes in God must follow him and be committed to him. Like, if your theology says that God is God, and he's the one, then it involves following. And that means committing to him and doing his will. And that is a disturbing message, isn't it? And so I feel like that's in there for us today. So there's a great diversity of ministries. And the demands of God are disturbing. and creating a strategy to bring something of what we used to have in our life from God, but we feel has gone, that involves just doing the same things again, but without going back to the font, to the source, isn't a good strategy. Strategy is you go back to the one. And if that means repentance, and if that means listening to something you don't want to listen to, or whatever it does, nonetheless, that is the way forward. And the Lord brings these days of reckoning into our lives as well, where we think, I'm now stuck, I really need to deal with this. I'm just going to say this, geography is not a hindrance to God. So, Mount Carmel, I read some things. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser in 841 BC said the mountain of Baal of the promontory, I can't say that word. He referred to Carmel in that way. So this is something I hadn't really understood. That Mount Carmel, whilst it had got a broken down altar on it to Yahweh, had always been, prior to that, and was again now, the place of Baal worship. So this is like Baal central. Do you understand? This is the place, the centrality of his power. When we moved in Deal to the church, the Baptist church, some people in from the Apostolic Church in Deal didn't like being in the Baptist church, right? And the reason for that was that they felt that in the stained glass window at the back, there was a kind of Star of David. I don't think it was a Star of David because they'd intended it to be, but it just was like a pretty window, and it had a kind of... And they said it's like a thing that means that we won't be blessed in this church. And some Christians can be very superstitious in that way. But here we can say this, that when Elijah goes to Mount Carmel, he's going on to home territory for Baal. And it is no problem to him. And I think we need to also receive this today, that wherever it is, whatever the situation, there was a place for sale in Thanet that I thought we could buy, which was for the office, and it was the Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever they call their places. What do they call their place? Kingdom Hall. Snappy title. And they were selling it, and I felt pleased in a way. That's naughty, isn't it? But I just thought, obviously, they haven't got enough congregation to have that there, and it was like a nice building. But I know that some people would think, don't buy the Kingdom Hall because it'll have some taint of the JWs on it that would affect our ability to push on. And I even think we can look at our lives sometimes and think, because of things we've done, because of sins we've committed, because of stuff that's occurred, we're tainted. Like there's some taint on us that means that we're never going to have that great breakthrough. Like we're never going to be able to do the thing. And I just want to say today that in the same way as geography is no hindrance to God, nothing about us is any hindrance to God. Like his ability to make the fire fall and produce a transformation is not limited by anything. It's not limited by anything. Like the only thing, really, I would suggest is just our willingness to step into what he's calling us to do. Like we could feel inadequate, or we could feel dirty, or we could feel a whole load of things, or we can think that all the stuff that's piled up against us is insurmountable. And we might have a future that is ahead of us that we think is always messed up by the way things are now. And yet the Lord is saying, my goodness, your family have always been safer with me. Your finances have always been safer with me. Your health has always been safer with me. Everything's always been safer. The world has always been safer with me. I will, like everything I said, all my promises, like Gabriel said, just going to keep them. And in the proper time, you'll see it occur. You could either live now as if that's true, or you could spend your days worrying about an uncertain, terrible future. But whichever way you choose to do it, my promises will still come true. So geography is no hindrance. Can I just say on the diversity of ministries, I'm sorry to go back to it, but just a little bit about Obadiah. Obadiah is a scaredy cat. Right? I'm just saying this because Elijah's great in this story, isn't he? Elijah is fed by ravens. Elijah brings the widow's son back to life. Elijah enables the oil and the flour to never run out. Elijah shows up at the right moment. Elijah hears what God is saying really, really clearly. Elijah speaks to Ahab. Elijah runs before the chariot. Elijah does all these things. And Obadiah pretends he isn't a believer, a Hebrew believer, in a palace full of pagans, and just tucks away some prophets here and there. And then when Elijah comes and says, "Take me to the king," he says, "You are joking. He'll kill me. What have I done wrong?" Right? And I just want to say this as well, just receive it. Maybe you're like Obadiah. Did God love Obadiah any less? Did God use Obadiah any less? Obadiah is in the scriptures with a special little parenthesis that says he was a devout believer who stayed true to God. Right? So maybe your ministry is, you're a devout believer who stays true to God, not so noticeable. And you have real worries about standing up for him in the workplace or whatever else. But that's okay. It's just okay. Everything's okay if God is who he says he is and if he's a promise-keeping God. We can just fall into that. And it doesn't matter about us then. We can just be us and let the whispers of God be something that directs our walk. Now on Mount Carmel, of course, on the day of reckoning, there are lots of prophets of Baal, hundreds of them. So it's Baal Central, Elijah is there, and there's a test to complete the burning of the sacrifice. And what shall I say here? Numbers are not a hindrance to God. Would you say that's fair? He's one, isn't he? They are many. Activity is not an inducement to God. Is that worth saying as well? Do you remember the prophets of Baal? They're running around going crazy, cutting themselves, doing all of this sort of stuff. I just think sometimes we can be tempted to think that the more we fast, the more we behave, the more we do good things, the more we make ourselves suffer, maybe God will do more stuff for us that we want. I'm not saying it's not right to fast or that we don't make a sacrifice for God. I'm not saying that at all. Actually, I'm talking about theology. The reality is Elijah had a theology of God which was like this. If God wants to send down the fire, it won't matter how much I pray. It will matter how much God intends to do it. That was his theology. So he just said, in fact, Elijah made it more difficult for God, didn't he? He thought, well, God, if you're going to send down the fire, then let's cover it with water. Let's really see something spectacular, because do you know what? If you don't send down the fire, I'm dead. So I don't mind how hard, because he had that theology of God, didn't he? The one who could feed him in the ravine could do anything. When he saw that boy come to life, he thought, you have the power to raise the dead. So you call me to go to Mount Carmel, to Baal Central, and bring down fire. You could bring down fire. I only need to say, dear God, please, could you send down the fire you said you were going to send down? And woof. See, I'm just saying today, if the Lord is calling us to expect something different for him, and if the Lord is calling us to look and see him as he truly is, then our theology needs to be more like Elijah's theology. Remember Jesus said, about the pagans, he said their way of thinking is they pray and pray and pray and pray because they think by their many words they will be heard. But we aren't like that. Our theology is different. Where is that passage? Luke, Matthew. Yes, Matthew, it's in the Sermon on the Mount, isn't it? Right, so Matthew 6. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Right, this isn't a call for us to not pray very much, is it? This is a call for us to see God differently. He isn't like Baal. Do you know Baal was the god of thunder? He was the god of the harvest. You know, if you follow Baal, you could have great weather, you could have great crops. If you were a man and you wanted to have, sex with another woman, you could go to the temple and there's prostitutes available. Hey, wow! Do you know, today people would like this. He's like Thor. He's like Thor, the god of thunder, who could do all of these things. Do you know that the real thing that matters in this story is quite simply, who is God? Is Baal God? Follow him then. But if Yahweh is God, if Jesus is the Son of God, follow him. And that, in essence, is what the day of reckoning brings. It just says, choose. And then, because of the theology of believing that God is who he is, you must follow him. Because he demands our lives, our full obedience, and he will pour out all the things that he intends to pour out into our life. Okay, that's it. I'm going to stop there. Can I hand over to you then, Denise? That's the message of the day.
I mean, there's been a lot, hasn't there? We need to be careful when we ask the Lord to really speak powerfully. Kate, you've also got something to share, haven't you? I'll ask you to do that now. And would the worship team be able to come up? Would it be possible to sing this one again, plus one other? Would that be okay? Thank you. I just want to be really open with something that's been happening with predominantly me, but our family. So Toby, I hope you don't mind me sharing this. I haven't discussed this in advance, but I'm really feeling that it connects with what Iabo brought when the Lord spoke to her, and it definitely connects with